What the scariest true story you know? The story of the Lake Nyos disaster. The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and all their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. I saw an interview of one of the first people at the scene afterwards. He said it was very still and quiet because even the insects were all killed. A lesser-known fact, even though many people died in this situation, it led scientists to discover another lake with almost the exact same situation occurring. The difference was that the other lake was near a relatively large city. A CO2 bubble forming at the bottom of the lake would have almost certainly been burst by an earthquake. Thankfully, since scientists were able to find it quick enough, they created a system that could slowly vent that CO2 and prevent many more people from dying. The Nutty Putty Cave incident: a spelunker got stuck upside down in a narrow cave for 26 hours. Crews tried to pull him out with pulleys, but had to be careful not to break his legs, because that could be fatal with the circumstances he was in. Rescuers even almost dislodged him, only for an anchor to fail at the last second, plunging him back into the crevice. He eventually died, and they sealed the cave shut with him inside. I read about this a few weeks ago. I had heart palpitations just thinking about being stuck in that hole. Just scary as hell. Thinking about it now makes my hands sweaty. I never understood the fascination with diving into such tight and dangerous spaces. Same. Of all the dangerous things to do, this one scares me the most. Knowing that once you get stuck, there is nobody there to help. I wish I could open my mind enough to understand it, but I just don't see the appeal of crawling into tight spaces in a hot, damp cave with no help nearby in case something goes wrong. In the 80s there was a Mexican cult led by an American named Adolfo Constanzo. They used to kidnap random people from tourist towns and nearby cities and perform human sacrifice on them in their rural Mexican desert compound, usually torturing in elaborate rituals for hours or days before finally letting them die. These rituals included vivisections, castrations, eyeball removal, tongue removal, teeth pulling, skin flaying, hanging, etc. They used amphetamines and cocaine to force the victim to stay awake during the torture and not pass out from shock. The cult believed the more pain and fear they could generate in the sacrifice victim, the more powerful the body parts would be as ritual trinkets and also for food for the cult's ngana, which is a large ritual cauldron used to store bones, blood, meat, and other valuable items that the cult believed gave them power. They used to make staves out of wired together spinal columns, and they would often eat the victim's eyeballs during the rituals. They are believed to have kidnapped and sacrificed over 26 people to their ngana in their 3 years that they were active from 1986 to 1989. The leader committed suicide when the police showed up at their compound. They arrested 14 cult members, but most people believe there were at least a dozen more that escaped and are still out there. Yo, what the duck? There was a cartel that kidnapped entire buses and made the people fight to the death. Just the men. The winners would become enforcers, assassins for the cartel. The captured women they made into sex slaves. Edit for the curious n.m.wikipedia.org. A guy in a sinking ship found an oxygen bubble and only drank a sip of Diet Coke every 7 hours. He was rescued after 60 hours after being under constant danger from drowning and even sharks. I've heard about this one. After his rescue, didn't he need to sit in isolation for a few days as pressure was released? Yep. Being that deep for so long would have caused the bends and killed him if he ascended too quickly, so I think he was put in a decompression chamber for 2 or 3 days. How did they get him into the chamber without the issues taking effect on his way there? The story of Jamie Kloss is terrifying. In rural Wisconsin last year, a 13-14-ish-year-old girl went missing after her parents were murdered in their home. Police arrived within 4 minutes or so, but she is just gone. Of course, speculation is that she was kidnapped, or that she was in on it, or dead, or whatever. Nobody knows because she has completely vanished. 88 days later, in the dead of a northern Wisconsin winter, she runs out into the street to a woman walking her dog. She had been held captive about 40 minutes from her home. All of that is scary enough, but here's the terrifying part. She had never had any contact with the guy that murdered her family and abducted her. One day he was driving to a new job, at which he only lasted a day, and saw her get on the school bus. At that moment he decided that he was going to take her. There was no warning. No grooming. There was absolutely nothing that she or her family could have done to avoid everything. A creepy young man saw her from 100 away and decided that he would murder her family and take her for himself. I remember reading ages ago about a guy who was in the military. He got back home after a tour of duty to find his wife and 2 kids dead. They lived in a remote location. Turned out the mom had a sudden heart attack or stroke or something, and the 2 little kids had died of starvation or dehydration as they were too young to care for themselves. Not exactly a ghost story, but as a parent that scares the shit out of me. Reminds me of a story. Dad, Mom, 3 kids decide they want to spend a weekend away at their cabin, but Dad has to work on Friday. They decide Mom kids will go on ahead without him and he will meet them at the cabin Saturday morning. Gigantic storm rolls through and suddenly a ducking tornado touches down. It destroys part of town, including the neighborhood where the family lives. Dad is a firefighter, so they are swamped with rescues, but Dad is happy his family is safe at the cabin. His truck finished their active calls and decide to take a drive around town to look for anyone needed help and see all the damage, and they drive down the family's street. The house is half destroyed, but more importantly, Dad spots Mom's car in the driveway. Mom, all 3 kids died because they had decided to wait for Dad as a surprise. There was over 25 deaths in total from the tornado. Dad ended up committing suicide a year or so later. The story was told to my dad when he went through first responder counseling by the firefighter Dad's old coworker. I can't fucking imagine. Thinking the whole time your family is safe, only to find out they stayed behind for you to surprise you. And died. I wouldn't last a year. Yeah, my dad was pretty crushed after hearing that story, but strangely it helped him cope with what he had been through. His work made him attend the course after they had a really bad accident, and my dad was the one who provided first aid. He didn't really talk about it, but he was really dark and solemn after his work thing, but after the course thing, he started to open back up bit by bit. PTSD in first responders and first aiders is so common, so the course was literally just a group therapy session where the guy sat and told some horror stories with tragic endings, a lot of suicides, to try and push the attendees to open up or seek one-on-one therapy. It's a lot of pride, so going to a one-on-one session is an ego blow, but at least a group therapy session doesn't put them on the spot. Allison Boda. On December 18, 1994, Port Elizabeth resident Allison Boda was abducted, raped, stabbed and left for dead by Franz Dutoit and Toons Kruger. They slashed her throat 17 times, so deep she had to hold her own head on as she crawled to the road for help. With her other hand she had to hold in the organs spilling from her stomach, where she had been stabbed more than 30 times. By some miracle the knife thrusts had missed her main arteries, so she did not bleed to death and was able to breathe through her severed trachea. There is a documentary that is on Amazon Prime called Allison. Worth a watch, but might be traumatic for some viewers. Trailer for Allison. In 1949, Timothy Evans was wrongly executed for murdering his pregnant wife and daughter. The actual murderer, John Christie, was a prosecution witness at Evans' trial. After Evans was executed, Christie went on to kill 4 more people. Had the police handled the forensic evidence properly, Christie would have been caught when they were investigating Evans, and those 4 people would still be alive. The government didn't acknowledge that Evans was innocent until 2004. It wasn't about forensics. The police coerced a confession out of Evans. We went over this in my linguistics class. A forensic linguist was able to determine that his verbatim confession had actually been written by 2 different people. That's why he was posthumously exonerated. The Reina Marroquin story. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss's wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally, one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. I grew up in a coastal town in Maine. There was a story that during Prohibition a barrel showed up at the post office with the name of someone that didn't exist. They let the barrel sit there in storage until the waiting period was over. Everyone assumed it was full of booze, and it was consumed by Caribou's townsfolk. When the barrel was empty, it was still quite heavy. They opened it up to find a dead body. Christ, that's sick. You'd think an old body would alter the taste of booze. Wonder how nobody at the very least noticed that.